Tonight's speaker, we're delighted to welcome the Reverend Michael Dowd. He's a best-selling TEDx speaker. He's given 2 TEDx talks, and he's an eco-theologian and a pro-science advocate. His book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize-winning scientists, noted skeptics, and even by religious leaders across the spectrum. Michael and his science writer, evolutionary educator, and activist wife, Connie Barlow, have spoken to some 3,000 religious and secular groups across North America since 2022. Their work has been featured in such journals or actually newspapers as the New York Times, the LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Newsweek, Discover, and even on television throughout the US and Canada, and on the cover of the UU World twice, in 1997 and again in 2006. He has carried on a number of different programs. His passion is sharing the inspiring side of science in ways that offer both practical tools for living in chaotic times and inspiration for engaging in the vital work. Today, he's going to talk to us about a path beyond hope and fear. Just to give a few comments about his presentation, as he says, no one needs convincing that we are living in challenging times and an age of breakdowns. Importantly, how can we be of support to others who are confused, angry, depressed, or filled with fear, blame, or guilt? Michael, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gail. And just in case anybody was taking notes, no, I haven't spoken 3,000 groups since 2022. It was since 2002. Otherwise, I'd have gone crazy. So let me go to screen share here. So the title of this program is The Big Picture, A Path Beyond Hope and Fear. I love this quote. Hope and fear are inseparable. There is no hope without fear, nor any fear without hope. Turns out that trust is the thing that can free us from the roller coaster of hope and fear. Trust in reality, trust in life as it really is. I suggest that staying sane in a crazy world starts with understanding and accepting reality as it really is, especially the things that you really don't like. That's the key. So just a little background. I'm a religious naturalist. I take nature to heart, although I typically, as you'll see, I use the word G, earth emoji, D, when I speak of nature. But ecology really is the heart of my theology. It's an eco-theo worldview. I suggest that that's what united almost all indigenous cultures, is what I call an eco-theo worldview. Here's my credo in a nutshell. Reality is my God. Evidence is my scripture. The epic of evolution is my creation story. Ecology is my theology. Integrity is my spiritual path. And evangelizing right relationship to reality is my mission. Ludwig Wittgenstein was one of my intellectual mentors. Philosophy of language was my course of study in college. I love this quote. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Because your God is whatever you put your faith or trust in, your ultimate concern. And this isn't just Michael Dowd saying this, arguably the most influential or one of the most influential theologians of the 20th century, Paul Tillich, famously identified faith as your ultimate concern. And I suggest that if this reality is not our ultimate concern, we're on an unsustainable path. That's our biophysical, our universal creator, sustainer, and end. And yet our language for that reality matters, because our name for that reality will either evoke hubris or humility. For example, if we refer to that reality as merely the environment and consider it an it to be exploited, that's very different than thinking of that reality as God, G, earth emoji, D. So the big picture, a path beyond hope and fear. As Gail mentioned, no one needs convincing that we are living in an age of chaos and breakdowns. Even those with no understanding of the runaway nature of biospheric and civilizational decline feel the stress. How do we cope? How can we escape the seesaw of hope and fear? And crucially, how can we be of support to others who are confused, angry, depressed, or filled with fear, blame, or guilt? I suggest that acceptance of 4 big picture truths is fundamental to sanity in a crazy making world. So here are 4 facts. These are 4 things that are evidentially certain. There's 10,000 things that we can be uncertain of, and a lot of those can bring anxiety. But these four things, if we ground our worldview in these four things, I suggest that we can have immeasurable gratitude, even in the midst of really difficult times. The first is that our main predicament is not climate change. It is ecological overshoot. Overshoot and collapse are built into the DNA of anthropocentric or human-centered civilizations. Denial, often adaptive inattention, is widespread as civilizations decline and collapse. And yet, even with that, calm gratitude during even the worst of times is possible and contagious. And we have dozens of examples from previous collapsed civilizations that that's the case. So here's an outline of the program this afternoon, this evening. The big picture, understanding the nature of our predicament, overshoot and collapse, that human-centered civilizations always lead to ecocide, homo denialists, why it's practically universal, and yet calm gratitude is possible even at Teotihuacan. That's the end of the world as we know it. Because we may or may not be at the end of the world full stop, but we're surely at the end of the world as we know it. I suggest that acceptance is the key to sanity and to what I call post-doom, no gloom peace of mind. Because awareness of ongoing, unstoppable collapse is hell. Only acceptance transforms lives. And then finding the gift on the other side of the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, acceptance, and then finding the gift beyond acceptance, trusting reality and the benefits of doing so. And here's again where history can serve as our teacher, staying positive and empowered even in the worst of circumstances. So my thesis is this. The stability of the biosphere has been in decline for centuries and in runaway, unstoppable collapse for decades. This great acceleration of technology and market-driven ecocide is an easily verifiable fact. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. Evidence is also compelling that the vast majority of people will deny this, especially those still benefiting from the existing order, those legitimately concerned about the consequences of collapse, and those who fear that accepting reality means giving up. And yeah, that's pretty much all of us fit that paragraph somewhere. The history of more than 80 previous boom and bust, rise and fall, progress, regress societies clearly reveals how and why Homo colossus is destined for near-term extinction. Homo colossus is a term that my mentor, William Catton, used for industrial humanity, where each of us uses 30 to 50 times the resources and exudes 30 to 50 times the waste as Homo sapiens. Homo colossus is destined for extinction. That may or may not mean the extinction of Homo sapiens, but it's certainly a possibility. Paradoxically, acceptance of collapse and its inevitable consequences may be the single most important thing that any of us can do to live fully, fearlessly, and inspiringly, that is where we're an inspiration to others, in this time of decline, that is at the end of the world as we know it. That's the key. A fundamental distinction is the distinction between problems that can be potentially solved and predicaments which can't be solved. Predicaments have no solutions, only outcomes. And yet we're used to the 20th century. If you throw enough energy and human ingenuity at something, you can solve a lot of problems. And yet what we face is actually a predicament. In fact, Richard Heinberg famously said, our fundamental predicament is not climate change, it is overshoot, of which global warming is a symptom. Overshoot of planetary boundaries, this is vital. Even if we could somehow solve climate, which we can't, but even if we could, there are half a dozen other planetary boundaries that we have already overshot. And some of them are extinction level. But most people, ecological overshoot of carrying capacity, who knows what that means? Well, many of us activists, we focus on these things: climate mayhem, death of the oceans, plant and animal annihilation, topsoil poisoning and loss, critical resource depletion, chemical and nuclear wastes, the growing gulf between the rich and the poor, economic instability and insanity, political polarization and conflict, contracting of in-groups, and the rise of totalitarianism and other isms. These we focus on, and yet all of these are symptom of ecological overshoot. And these first three are actually in extinction level runaway mode. And I'm not going to say a lot more about this. I've done two short videos, Collapse in a Nutshell, Understanding Our Predicament, and Overshoot in a Nutshell. These are the only two videos I've ever created that went viral. They're my attempt to really basically create a collapse for dummies. And you got hopium. Hopium, here's my definition of hopium: a comforting vision of the future that requires breaking the laws of physics, biology, or ecology. Irrational or unwarranted optimism that promises short-term relief, but delivers crushing disappointment and despair when reality inevitably bites. believing that the climate crisis can be fixed or solved by doubling down on the very things driving ecocide, and believing that Homo colossus can be saved or transformed, or is merely in a transition stage to a more evolved society. I suggest that those are examples of hopium. Hopium leads good people to unnecessarily suffer and unknowingly increase the likelihood of excessive nuclear meltdowns and species extinction. We're going to have some nuclear meltdowns and many species go extinct anyway, but unnecessarily exacerbates those, hopium. So by far, the most important book I've ever read in my life, many people consider it the most important book of the 20th century, is William Catton's book, Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change. And here's a quote from that book. Humanity is locked into stealing ravenously from the future. That is what this book is about. A major aim is to show that commonly proposed solutions for problems confronting us are actually going to aggravate those problems. In order to truly understand our predicament and not make things worse, we need a clear-headed ecological interpretation of history. And that's what we don't have. We don't learn a clear-headed ecological interpretation of history in our churches and synagogues and our schools or our homes. Where do we learn it? But that's the key right there, is that commonly proposed solutions are going to make things worse without that. For example, here are some climate solutions that make things worse. Nuclear, renewables, wind and solar, fusion, space colonization, carbon taxation, carbon credits, biofuels, super batteries, carbon sequestration, green economy, electric cars. The reason that they make things worse is because they exacerbate and extend ecological overshoot. And each one also requires the four main drivers of collapse and ecocide to persist. I did a video just on that topic, the main drivers of collapse, ecocide, and likely near-term human extinction. The first is extractive exploitative civilizations themselves. I'll say a lot more about that here in a few minutes. Scientism, not science itself, because science is a way of knowing, but where we think that science gives us the answers to everything important, and technology based on that science. For example, electricity. Many people believe that if we just shift how we generate electricity, we'll be fine. Whereas if you actually map onto the world, a map of the electrification of the world and ecocide, you see that they map perfectly. The problem isn't how we generate electricity. The problem is electricity generation itself. Progress and development, what we call progress and development. I'll say a lot more about that in money-based growth economics. And I suggest that underneath all of those is the fundamental ultimate cause, which is anthropocentrism or human-centeredness. In fact, the other program, when I was invited to do this, the other one I was going to offer as a possibility is collapse and ecocide as a religious failure, God blind, biosphere deaf. If I'm ever invited back to do another program, that's the one I'll do here. So collapse, what do we mean by collapse? We think of a collapse of a building. Well, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Collapse of ecosystems isn't like that. Collapse is when a gradual downward trend in biophysical health and well-being goes into unstoppable decline, runaway, out of control, such as abrupt climate change. Abrupt climate change is like 10,000 years of climate change in half a human lifetime. For example, here's a track of industrial civilization over the last 273 years, actually. We see a gradual downward trend in biophysical health and well-being and going into out of control decline, runaway, unstoppable, since about 1950. It's known as the Great Acceleration of Biosphere Collapse. In fact, all you've got to do is Google Great Acceleration, and you see tons of charts. 70 years ago, 23 years ago. And by every measure, there's not a single measure of what we're dependent upon, like the systems that we are utterly dependent upon to survive and thrive. Every single system is no longer just in decline, it's now in precipitous free fall. For example, this is the kind of charts that you'll find if you Google the Great Acceleration. You've got socioeconomic trends on the left, Earth system trends, but because of the way our brains work, we naturally think up is better. And yet the ones on the left are actually ecocidal trends. The ones on the right, Earth system collapse, world population, large dams, urban population, fertilizer consumption on the left, international tourism. And on the right, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and so forth. That's what these really are, is ecocidal trends and Earth system collapse trends. So it should be this. I've turned this on its head just so that we can get an accurate feeling in our gut that the stability of the biosphere, Gaia's health, has been in decline for centuries and in unstoppable collapse for 2 to 7 decades. This is the great acceleration, but it's actually the great acceleration of biosphere collapse. Again, every single measurement, climate, CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, the stability that allowed for the growing of grain and civilizations to emerge, ice, all over the world, we're losing the ice, oceans, plankton, coral, fish, acidification, oceanic dead zones, the rise of ocean rise, the soil, the amount of soil, fertility, moisture, permafrost, and then the mass extinction. There's only been one mass extinction in the last 6 or 8, depending upon how you count them. There's only one that we've lost the insects and forests, and we're actually adding nitrous oxide, methane, and carbon dioxide faster than them. So here's the painful thing that this is repulsive. In fact, you will want to deny this. In fact, you may wake up tomorrow morning and say, Michael, Dowd's crazy. I can't accept any of this. That's okay. I mean, that's our natural impulse, because no matter how massive and how effective is nonviolent civil disobedience, no matter who or which party is elected into or voted out of public office, no matter how many people change their habits, become vegan, stop flying, etc., no matter how many game-changing, artificial intelligence-driven high-tech solutions are tried, no matter how much evolution of consciousness occurs in the next decade or two, no matter how aggressively we try to shift to so-called renewables or net zero emissions, no matter how many psychopathic or sociopathic CEOs and bankers are imprisoned, and no matter how many accords, what is pledged or agreed to, what laws are enacted. And this one here, you don't have to take my word on it. We're already 2 to 3 decades into abrupt, runaway, and exponentially accelerating climate mayhem. Here's the data. Here are all of our COPs, our Conference on the Parties. You can see those on this chart. And it turns out that we've been going in the opposite direction. It's getting worse. Our summits, our agreements, our promises and pledges are actually worse than meaningless. And the reason they're worse than meaningless is simply because they give us the illusion that we're making progress. In the 1960s, carbon parts per million was going up 0.9 parts per million per year. In the 70s, it was 1.3 parts per million per year. In the 1980s and 90s, 1.5 parts per million per year. In the 2000s, 2.0. In the 2010s, 2.4. And COP27 just happened last November. Now the projection is between 2.8 and 3 parts per million per year throughout the 2020s. That's what I mean by abrupt runaway and exponentially accelerating, not just climate change, climate mayhem. And that's just the CO2. When you actually add nitrous oxide and methane, we're actually over 500 parts per million in what's called carbon dioxide equivalent already now as of 2023. So again, no matter what, this is what unstoppable means. No matter what, these extinction level, or at least potentially extinction level tipping points are already in the rearview mirror. The loss of the world's ice, Arctic, Greenland, Antarctica, mountain glaciers. Here's the thing, when most of the Arctic sea ice is gone, the serious global warming begins. And you could Google phase change in latent heat. You'll see what I'm talking about. I'm not going to go into the details here now. Methane belching, loss of methane from the permafrost, from the methane hydrates and clathrates, that's the deep and shallow seas, especially in the north, gas and oil wells, wetlands. This is already in runaway mode. In fact, there was a thing published just last year on the wetlands. Ocean acidification, ocean deoxygenation, loss of oxygen, and at least 25 feet of abrupt nonlinear sea level rise. If every human being went extinct tonight, some virus wiped us out, or if everybody woke up tomorrow morning with an ecological epiphany, there's nothing we can do to stop at least 25 feet of sea level rise. And that comes from the former head of the Jacques Cousteau Society, John Englander, one of the leading voices on the health of the rate of sea level rise. The great conflagration of the world's forests. This is already in runaway mode. Every year, we will see more forest fires, bigger forest fires, more intense forest fires. It's already out of our control. Even if we could stop greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, all human emissions, if every human went extinct tonight, we would still see carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide rise for the next 30 to 50 years. Loss of most species of animal and plant on the land and in lakes, rivers, and oceans. And then increasingly severe and deadly weather, storms, floods, droughts, hurricanes. And we're already seeing this around the world. So I think it's important, especially in an IRAS context, to untrivialize, to realize moral language. Good and evil are not merely context dependent, they're not relative. Good and evil in every healthy culture has applied to ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. In fact, Loyal Rue writes about this in several of his books. So good is what promotes ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. Evil is what diminishes or destroys or degrades ecological integrity, social coherence, and personal wholeness. This is not moral rocket science. So denial and hope, especially hopium, not all forms of hope are bad by any means, but denial and hopium lead good people to unwittingly ensure geological scale evil. And here's what I mean. We have 440 nuclear reactors worldwide. In fact, maybe more. I created this slide a couple of years ago, requiring us to assume that industrial civilization has everlasting life. And yet we're already 25 to 30 years into abrupt runaway climate mayhem. So here's the 64 million year question, not $64 million question for those of you that are old enough to know what that refers to, but the 64 million year question. As industrial civilization continues to collapse faster and faster, how many Chernobyl or Fukushima-like or worse meltdowns due to wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, tsunamis, power grid failures, political instability, or terrorism do you think are possible, likely, inevitable? I consider these four deadly accurate metaphors. That Homo colossus, industrial humanity, has stage 4 lung cancer. Arguing for so-called green technology or an energy transition is like believing that organic cigarettes can restore health and win the fight against death. The global economy is a parasitic superorganism. This parasitic superorganism is now entering its death throes because it has exhausted its host, Gaia, Earth, and its own financial creativity, such that it cannot continue growing, which is a prerequisite for its survival. Industrial civilization is a demon devouring the living world and creating hell on earth. Those who advocate for so-called renewables, clean energy, or a Green New Deal are actually proposing strategies to keep the demon on life support. And our rapacious civilization is a serial killer, a mass murderer. Advocating for geoengineering and or widespread electrification is akin to doing everything in our power to ensure that the killer has a long and prosperous career while providing a lifetime stay-out-of-jail-free card. So I get that all of that is repulsive and unacceptable. I get that in spades. But we're not uniquely evil. We're not uniquely stupid. Civilizations, human-centered civilizations, turns out always lead to ecocide. And that's the main thing that we deny. Denial is simply the largely unconscious habit of thought whereby we refuse to accept the reality of things that are bad or upsetting, or that challenge our worldview, our legacy, how we live, what is required of us, and or our feelings of self-worth or superiority. Denial is also the reflexive impulse to reject or discount information that calls into question our hopes, assumptions, or expectations about the future. I have denial instincts, you do, everybody we know and love does, so we can have compassion for ourselves and each other. Like this, Connie took this picture. I've heard of denial, I just don't believe in it. This is a famous quote, and I've done a paraphrase. It is difficult to get a person to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. Here's my expansion. It's nearly impossible to get someone to understand what is collapsing their world and creating hell on earth when the answer is their own civilization. That's the key. That's the repulsive thing. Turns out that collapse and ecocide are built into the DNA of all anthropocentric or city-based agriculture, human-centered civilizations. Here are some quotes that basically, we're used to thinking of civilization as a good thing. Here's some sobering quotes. Forests precede civilizations and deserts follow them. All of our exalted technological progress, civilization for that matter, is comparable to an axe in the hand of a pathological criminal. Civilization is a hopeless race to discover remedies for the evils it produces. The end of the human race will be that it will eventually die of civilization. And the earth is littered with ruins of empires and civilizations that once believed they were eternal. And that's not an exaggeration. A few years ago, the BBC did a deep civilization series Luke Kemp wrote an article called "Are We on the Road to Civilizational Collapse?" Because it turns out that collapse is a feature of all human-centered agricultural city-based civilizations. He has this chart of 88 ancient civilizations between 3000 BCE and 1000 of the Common Era. Just that 4,000 year period. If you go back before 3000 BC, or if you look at the last 1,000 years, it's well over 100. And we understand, as Arnold Toynbee, the famous 20th century historian, said, great civilizations are not murdered. They take their own lives. And it turns out we actually know how human-centered civilizations commit ecocide, commit suicide. And this is just the last 5% of human history, the last 8,000 years, roughly 400 generations. Typically, the process takes between 225 and 325 years. That's sort of the average. There's some exceptions, but that's by far the average. There's more than 80 examples. We see progress, rise, boom. Ecological overshoot of carrying capacity is that entire process. It's where we use more resources and exude more waste than the system can bear, and it starts breaking down. And then we see regress, fall, bust. And this is an unstoppable process of collapse. In over 80 examples, actually more than that, there's never been an example in human history where some society or civilization on the way down has been able to transform and become sustainable. It can't happen for very well-known reasons, but most people don't know this. And yet our inner world, our feelings, our expectations, our emotions, it matters when you're born and when you die. If you're born and die in times of expansion, in times of economic progress and technological progress, well, of course, your kids and grandkids are going to have it better than you. It's like, well, duh. And if you're born in times of fall, decline, well, of course, your kids and grandkids are going to have it more difficult. It's just the way things are. It's when you're born in times of expansion and it shifts in your lifetime, which is true for all of us on this call, that's what you call doom. That's hell until you accept it. Only with acceptance can you come to the place of what I'm calling post-doom, no gloom. It's living hope-free. It's rejecting the hopeful or hopeless dichotomy. It's living hope-free. And acceptance of what? Specifically, acceptance of the unstoppable nature of collapse. And again, there's over 80 examples. This little 75-page book, William Ophuls is one of my intellectual mentors. He's an amazing ecological thinker. He's about 90 years old now. But this 75-page book takes an entire library of research, scholarship on why civilizations rise and fall, especially how they fall, and brings it together in 75 pages. And then I just recorded the audio of this one, Electrifying the Titanic, the Shipwreck of Industrial Civilization. And then his book, Apologies to the Grandchildren. Here's how that book begins. This is the very beginning of Apologies to the Grandchildren. Civilization is, by its very nature, a long-running Ponzi scheme. It lives by robbing nature and borrowing from the future, exploiting its hinterland until there's nothing left to exploit, after which it implodes. While it still lives, it generates a temporary and fictitious surplus that it uses to enrich and empower the few and to dispossess and dominate the many. Industrial civilization is the apotheosis and quintessence of this fatal course. A fortunate minority gains luxuries and freedoms galore, but only by slaughtering, poisoning, and exhausting creation. Now, of course, the prophets of progress would have us believe, and perhaps many of you believe, but it's different this time. We don't understand the role that fossil fuels have played and why it's different this time. And so we've got these New York Times bestselling books, Matt Redley, the Rational Optimist, Peter Diamandis, Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think, Hans Rosling, The Factfulness, 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. And then, of course, the best known of them, Steven Pinker, in his book, Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. And then his earlier book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. And he shows in Enlightenment Now, he's got 75 charts, and he shows he's accurate. He shows how things are getting better and better for at least a small subset of humanity, and he's accurate on all of those. So it's from that perspective, it's never been better. And he rightfully claims that technological progress and expansion and economic growth and development are the things that have been driving that. He's absolutely right. But it's never been worse for everything we depend upon. Overpopulation, overdevelopment, overshoot. Technological progress and expansion and economic growth and development. The soil, the forest, the water species, everything, it's worse for everything. the loss of soil organisms, nutrients, groundwater, glaciers, rapidly and significantly expanding deserts, deadly droughts, heat waves, hurricanes, flooding, oceanic acidification and dead zones, plastic pollution, nuclear waste, toxic air, water, and soil, and the catastrophic loss of most species. And of course, overshoot is what causes climate change. And so we need to call this what it is. It's technological devastation and ecocide, and economic growth and destruction. And yes, I know that for many of you watching this right now, this is repulsive to even consider. Some of you have probably already turned this off. Now, how is it that Steven Pinker and the other prophets of progress are blind to this obvious fact that progress is precisely what's causing ecocide? Why don't we see this? Why don't they see this? Well, Steven Weinberg, Nobel Prize winner, said, with or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion. Now, he was critiquing the monotheistic religions, but it's just as true for the secular religion of perpetual progress. Here's the creation story. Stone Age, cavemen, savages, primitives, hunter-gatherers. And then we see the agricultural revolution. Notice the positive term. Farming, cities, civilization. The Enlightenment, reason, science, humanism, progress. And the reason I have exclamation points is this is the enthusiasm with which these authors speak. The Industrial Revolution, fossil fuels, technology. And then globalization, space travel. And I don't know of a techno-optimist that doesn't have a Star Trek vision of the future. I certainly did for 12 years. I believed that, from the caves to now to the stars, that was the gospel I preached from 2000 to December 3rd of 2012. I now consider this the techno-idolatrous ecocidal myth of man, conqueror of nature, which I suggest is the most ecocidal thought form in human history. Good people are dangerous, and great people will engage in great evil when they hold the ecocidal and self-terminating belief that we are destiny's darlings, masters of the universe, conquerors of nature, God's chosen species, or the pinnacle of evolution. But good people are also dangerous when their God is not synonymous with reality, or when their map of reality is outdated by privileging ancient mythic texts over current evidential revelation. So how does denial show up? Well, it turns out the most common way is what I call the myth of the almighty we, a secular religious faith in omnipotent human agency. It takes many forms. Often in the happy chapter, you read a book with 10 chapters, the first 9 chapters are doom, and the last chapter is all about, like, if we all just do this, we can turn things around. Progress and development, biosphere management, climate restoration, geoengineering, global scale mobilization, the evolutionary emergence of consciousness, and just the whole interpreting emergence in a human-centered way, global degrowth revolution, species level awakening, and societal or social tipping points. I love this cartoon. It's not too late to stop the worst of climate change if we all accept reality and work together for the common good. And that's the key phrase. If we all, we're screwed. So I'm claiming, as bizarre as it may sound, and I realize this program is not going to make me any friends, for people are going to Star Island this year to discuss how technology can serve hope and justice. I get that. But I'm claiming that calm gratitude is possible at Teotihuacan, at the end of the world as we know it. How is that possible? Well, that's what the rest of this program is about, basically. First, I want to just sort of be playful in terms of how to, before I talk about how to have gratitude, immeasurable gratitude, how to maximize misery at Teotihuacan. This is sort of reverse psychology. It's meant to be playful. Whine and complain about how unfair it all is, and condemn those that you judge as responsible for your and our difficulties. Cling to faith in progress, believing that we are the most evolved and advanced creatures, and our brains the most complex organ in the cosmos. No, the biosphere is the most complex organism that we know, not our brains. Insist that we can, if we all, condemn pessimistic doomists and angrily demand justice for those oppressed by patriarchal and colonial exploitation. Pretend that we're not in runaway collapse and put your faith in hopium technofix solutions touted by the IPCC, media experts, best-selling authors, etc. And do as much doom scrolling and or desperate hope seeking as possible, while privately or secretively wallowing in grief, anxiety, fear, depression, or despair. And then spend most of your time indoors viewing screens and as little time as possible outdoors, mesmerized by life and in deep communion with God. So these are really essential if you want to maximize misery. And if it's not obvious what I'm meaning by deep communion with God, I've done a number of longer programs: God, owning our error, accepting our fate; Sustainability 101, indigenuity is not optional; My God, what have we done? A little short video, one of the best things I've ever done for a progressive Christian audience. That's what the co-pilot of the Enola Gay said as we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. My God, what have we done? And then collapse and ecocide is religious failure, God blind, and biosphere death. I suggest that the theism versus atheism debate is a form of collective insanity. You got thousands, maybe millions of people debating whether or not God is real or whether or not God exists, when the one real God, namely reality, our biophysical and spiritual creator, sustainer, and end, we ignore and we treat as an it, thinking that we can exploit it rather than a thou to be honored and respected. It's absolutely crazy. I suggest that there's a main ecocidal delusion that God either doesn't exist or that God is otherworldly and favors human beings above all other godlings. I love this quote from the Native American elder, Daniel Wildcat. We live among relatives, not resources. And Thomas Berry, my great mentor, said the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. The environment, after all, is not our surroundings. It is our biophysical creator, sustainer, and end. This is one of my favorite movies. Connie and I watched it a couple dozen times. Don't Look Up. Neil deGrasse Tyson said it well. He said, I finally saw the Netflix documentary, or the Netflix film, Don't Look Up, a fictional tale of a nation distracted by pop culture and divided on whether to heed dire warnings of scientists. Everything I know about news cycles, talk shows, and social media and politics tells me the film was instead a documentary. Because a comet actually is heading our way. We ourselves set it in motion millennia ago. But only recently have scientists, echoing long-standing indigenous warnings, charted its course and voiced the alarm. Its name is anthropocentrism. In religious language, mythic language, idolatry. And these are the end times, the real end times, because human-centeredness, as opposed to God-centeredness, life-centeredness, will prove to be just as unstoppable and nearly as deadly as the comet in the movie. Many of us are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. It was penned in the 1960s by Ronald Niebuhr. God, life, reality, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. But many of us don't know this next line: living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace. Joseph Brodsky won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1987. He was a Russian polymath who taught at some of the most prestigious schools in Canada and the United States. And he famously said, you Americans are so naive. You think evil is going to come into your houses wearing big black boots. It doesn't happen like that. Look at the language. It begins in the language. So here are the ways that our predicament is commonly phrased. We are at risk of civilizational collapse. We need to declare a climate emergency. Now is the time to act. The situation is dire. Our time is a great awakening, a great turning, a great transition. The window of opportunity for bold action is closing. Green technology, green capitalism can reverse climate change. Evolution means progress, and there are solutions. And without fill in the blank, we're doomed. No, the unfortunate, repulsive fact is we're doomed. Now what? As this New York Times bestselling book goes into. But that doesn't mean, because we can't save everything, doesn't mean there's not a lot of great stuff that we can do. It's the opposite of giving up, because it's not too late. Here's the part of changing what we can. Everything and anything that you can do to further enhance, support ecological integrity, social coherence, and that justice as well, and personal wholeness is a good thing, and it's a moral obligation, in my opinion, to reduce suffering and adapt to less. I got that from John Michael Greer. Less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. We can all adapt to less. To resist further destruction and evil. It's not too late for that. It's not too late to assist trees and other plants in migrating. That's my wife, Connie Barlow. This is her main work. It's known as assisted migration. It turns out the difference between hundreds of species, maybe more, of native species of trees in North America going extinct in the next 50 years or potentially surviving the next 50 years depends entirely on humans assisting them in migrating. You can learn more if you just go to the Wikipedia page, Assisted Migration of Forests in North America. It's not too late to support indigenous resistance. Where is the air, the water, the soil, the forests being protected most fiercely? Usually with indigenous leadership. It's not too late to be a blessing to friends, family, and community. It's not too late to be a loving person. And it's not too late to engage in regenerative love and action. Anything and everything we can do to participate in regenerative, everything should be done, in my opinion. However, it is too late, or was never possible in the first place. Here's the part of accepting what we cannot change. It's too late to change the narrative or awaken enough people to transform social, political, and economic systems. It's too late to slow, stop, or reverse abrupt climate mayhem and the accelerating collapse of the biosphere and business as usual. It's too late to prevent the loss of most of the world's forests, ice, insects, coral reefs, and protective ozone layer. It's too late to spare Homo colossus the ecocidal consequences of human ingenuity, technology, and the market. And it is too late to prevent billions of humans and other mammals and vertebrates from dying this decade or next. And yes, I know that this is totally repulsive and unacceptable. I get that. And yet I suggest that accepting those 4 things at the start that I talked about, cultivating calm gratitude at Teotihuacan. The first is to stop denying, fighting, or bemoaning your fate. Amor fati, that embrace your fate. In fact, just literally yesterday, I encountered this poem, Parachute by Mark Causey. Your parachute didn't open. Don't panic. It does not help. Don't waste what precious time is left on anger and recrimination. At this point, what does it matter who's to blame? It won't change the simple fact that your parachute did not open. You are flying for now. Barrel roll and glide at will. Feel the great rush of wind. Take in the view. See the sun, the clouds, treetops, the colorful patchwork quilt of the ground. So much beauty. Think of how many humans who have ever lived that never got to see things from your perspective. You knew all along that you could not hold onto the earth forever, just as you could not let it go either. It is holding you now, pulling you close. Don't waste time bargaining for a miracle. Magical thinking is of no use to you here. Instead, as you descend, lift up a prayer of gratitude for all that has been your life. Speak a blessing to all you have loved. You still have a little time left. You are fortunate because you are the one that gets to decide how to use it. Celebrate the big picture and serve your fellow godlings. Anything that we can do to be a blessing to others, other creatures, other humans, is a good thing, and it promotes calm gratitude. The epic of evolution, remembering who you are and what you are. This is the whole universe story, epic of evolution. And honor when and where you are. This is the nature of living local, bioregionalism, permaculture, this sort of thing, ecofeminism. Embrace your mortality and embrace our mortality, and then simplify your life and commit to less. As I said before, less energy, less stuff, and less stimulation, but I've added another S, sort of less with a lisp, less suffering. We can all be committed to lessening suffering in the world. Let go of judgmental blame, self-righteousness, and self-pity. Get complete with everyone. Express care, gratitude, and regrets. Contribute to the well-being of others, human and non-human, and nurture awe, gratitude, courage, compassion, and generosity. All of these things are about cultivating calm gratitude, even in the real end times. And then finally, finding the gift, the benefits of acceptance. I just have a few slides on this. The benefits of acceptance and trusting reality. Here's where history can be our teacher, staying positive and empowered even in the worst of circumstances. Because it turns out, in the same way that if you are diagnosed with a terminal condition, as long as you stay in fight mode, hoping, you're not going to have peace. But when you truly accept that you're dying, you may have 6 months, you may have 6 years, but you're dying, all of a sudden, things get really clear. Clarity can replace confusion. Compassion can replace blame. And love and action can replace desperate, fearful activism. It helps to reprioritize nearly everything around what matters, what really matters, and really what doesn't. A calm urgency to get complete with self, family, others, life, and legacy. Focuses attention on home, family, community, what's local, what's joyful, what's meaningful. Freedom from a whole host of shoulds, oughts, have tos, and freedom for coulds, mights, get tos. Usually an overwhelming gratitude for the gift of simply being alive, aware, and able to feel deeply, including feeling grief. And an expansive sense of self, identity that doesn't stop with the skin and encapsulated ego, as Alan Watts used to say, that the universe is our larger self, our larger body, and of impermanence and death is sacred. Connie and I, for almost 20 years, did programs on a sacred science or a meaningful, inspiring, evidential way of approaching mortality and death. I've done 90 post-doom conversations. This one I highly recommend, particularly on this topic, 15 benefits of collapse acceptance. Because collapse awareness is hell. Only acceptance transforms lives. Connie and I just rewatched this just 2 days ago, and it's fabulous. And then Jordan Perry is Karen's husband, because the actions that we do when we're in expansion are not the same actions that we do when we realize that we're in an unstoppable collapse. And so 14 post-doom actions. And then Meg Wheatley, there's actually 3 post-doom conversations, 2 of them other people have had. But this is on this topic of beyond hope and fear. I just had this just recently, last October. So again, just to revisit the thesis, the stability of the biosphere has been in decline for centuries and in runaway, unstoppable collapse for decades. This great acceleration of technology and market-driven ecocide is an easily verifiable fact. The scientific evidence is overwhelming. Evidence is also compelling that the vast majority of us will deny this, especially those still benefiting from the existing order, those legitimately concerned about the consequences of collapse, and those who fear that accepting reality means giving up. The history of more than 80 previous boom and bust societies clearly reveals how and why Homo colossus is destined for near-term extinction. Paradoxically, acceptance of collapse and its inevitable consequences may be the single most important thing that any of us can do to live fully, fearlessly, and inspiringly in this time of global hospice or Tiatawaki. So I want to conclude on this note. How can we tell? How can each of us tell whether we're accepting or resisting that we're in a time of global hospice? Well, our feelings will tell us, because here are the feelings that are commonly associated with acceptance: trust and gratitude, awe, love, and sweet grief. We're not going to do away with grief, but there's a sweet grief that comes with acceptance. Generosity and compassion, calm, courageous love and action, and then joy in the little things, including gallows humor. The feelings commonly associated with non-acceptance are these: optimism or pessimism, hope or hopelessness, anxiety, fear, guilt, desperate activism, anger and depression, and self-righteousness. And these first 4 there, optimism or pessimism, hope or hopelessness, those make no sense. They're absurd in light of natural laws, facts, and 99 to 100% certainties. I mean, when you throw a ball in the air, you're not hopeful or hopeless it's going to come down. You're not optimistic or pessimistic. It's coming down. That's why I suggest that these 4 things that we can ground in. We're overshoots the issue, not climate change. We're doing what all human-centered civilizations have done. That denial is going to be practically universal. You're not going to get your friends and relatives to probably even watch this. And calm gratitude and really joy are possible even in the worst of circumstances. Final note of encouragement. Expect to bounce back and forth between hope and fear, If despite everything you've learned, you do not accept that the collapse of industrial civilization is both ongoing and unstoppable. The pace and region by region impacts of abrupt climate mayhem do not need to be certified by science in order to accept that they are real and will rapidly worsen. Don't take anything for granted. Celebrate it all. Live life fully, love the life you live, and be the biggest blessing to others that you possibly can for as long as you can. This, I suggest, is the key to experiencing joy independent of circumstances, even at Teotihuacan and quite likely near-term human extinction. That's the gold. Close with these quotes. Do not lose heart. We were made for these times. When a civilization is in decline, optimism is cowardice. We need courage, not hope, to face climate change. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. And here's a practical one. Plant a garden, meet your neighbors, practice generosity, learn new skills, control what you can, and leave the rest. All of my work can be found at postdoom.com. 90 conversations, all kinds of resources, and how to connect with others who are in this conversation.
Michael, thank you so much. That was quite a tour de force and really very, very interesting. And there are already questions that are generated, but we have a respondent. So I'd like to turn to Mark Iredell. Mark is a retired atmospheric scientist. After 32 years at NOAA, he was working to improve weather forecasts. He's currently a member of the Religious Naturalist Association and Elders Climate Action. Mark, please join us now.
Hi, I just came. Thanks, Michael. That was a very eye-opening talk. As Gail said, I've spent my career in weather prediction, although I don't do that anymore. And I'm now doing activist things. We, keep making improvements in weather prediction, but we always have a forecast bust around the corner. And so that's sort of where I'm going to go with, is that my takeaway from that was that prediction is humbling, especially about the future. And that's a statement that's a takeoff of what's attributed to Niels Bohr, is that prediction is hard, especially about the future. And Niels Bohr is famous for formalizing uncertainty in physics. And that's, I want to discuss uncertainty here, not only on the Steve Pinker side, but also on the Michael Dowd side of the picture. And the way I want to go with that is that, of course, uncertainty is everywhere. It's on the quantum scale, but it's also on the planetary scale with ecosystem change, and of course on the universal scale. And it's a key feature in weather forecasts, where you say 80% chance of rain. And so it's a necessary part of active science. So research is pursued only because there's uncertainty in something. And so they pursue it. And then when you publish, you have to measure the uncertainty of your results, like a p-value of something. And then even after you finish your research, even though you've narrowed down one uncertainty, often two more questions pop up out of that. And so I feel like we're never out of uncertainty. And there's always uncertainty. And for me, that's kind of a blessing. And I wrote a little uncertainty blessing over a decade ago, if I can read it here. It's, may the road taken on the drunkard's walk rise to meet your feet. May the chaotic turbulence of wind and life be always at your back. May the quantum electromagnetic particles shine warm upon your face. And may you embrace reality's uncertainty as it embraces you. And so I want to go back in time a little bit to the 2016 election, where in order to cope with that, I read this book, Hope in the Dark, by Rebecca Solnit. And her theme is Uncertainty can provoke hope and action because we don't know how bad it's going to be. And if I can quote something from the book, it said, it's important to say what hope is not. It is not the belief that everything was or will be fine. The evidence is all around us of tremendous suffering and tremendous destruction. The hope I'm interested in, this is Rebecca Solnit, is about broad perspectives with specific possibilities, ones that invite or demand that we act. It's also not about sunny, everything is better narrative. You could call it an account of complexities and uncertainties with openings. That's the end of the quote. And then going back even further in time, speaking of some people believing everything is fine, in the 18th century, Leibniz is famous not only for developing calculus, but also believing that we live in the best of possible worlds. And Voltaire lampooned his philosophy by writing the picaresque novel Candide, which I have to say is still quite a fun read today. I would recommend anyone who hasn't read it, go read it. And the title character Candide and his teacher, Professor Pangloss, go on a series of romps. And Pangloss, who's the Steven Pinker character in the book, keeps repeating, all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds, through one disaster after another. But in the end, young Candide rejects both optimism and pessimism. And to conclude, we must cultivate our garden. And so I believe reality is neither infinite progress nor immediate doom myself. And do I have uncertainty in that belief? Yes, I do. So it might not be true, but people are pretty complex, and I feel they can accommodate hope and grief at the same time. And I when you see loved ones of cancer sufferers seem to manage balancing those hope and grief, and that's how they manage, getting through that. And I still think we need both action and hope and acceptance and grief. But anyway, let us cultivate our garden. So thank you very much for your talk. And I do have one question. Let's see if I can find it.
Thank you for what you just shared. That was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Should I ask the question?
No. Please ask your question.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
All right. So when everything starts hitting the fan, you mentioned courage in one of your slides, having to nurture courage. But where does that come from? How do people find that in your thing when you just accept what's going on? That's my question.
Yeah, great question, Mark. So I would never use the word just before accept, because for me, acceptance is really on the path to trust. And whether you refer to that as trust in reality, trust in the universe, faith in God, with or without the earth emoji, accepting what's so, cherishing what is, those are all different ways of saying that whatever this larger reality in which we live and move and have our being, there's a wisdom beyond us. And if we can put our trust or faith or acceptance in that we have better lives. And so the courage in terms of courageous love and action, in my experience, comes from several things. One is that I have a little ritual that I do every morning. I recommend little rituals in a person's day. There's something, and by ritual, I simply mean meaningful, patterned speech and behavior. And so I have a little ritual that when Connie wakes up, I massage her feet, and then I get her coffee. And then I read climateandeconomy.com. I actually avoid most news because what I find is that, at least here in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans are the left wing and the right wing of the American corporate party, and that virtually all the major media are propaganda one side or the other. I often will scan, sometimes a few times a week, but the only thing I check daily is climateandeconomy.com. climateandeconomy.com. There's 25 to 30, sometimes 35 little short snippets, little picture, a headline. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday is climate. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday is economy. And it tracks on without all the propaganda and trying to get me to think or believe or feel something, simply what's factually occurring around the world. It's like a snapshot 3 times a week in terms of climate and 3 times a week in terms of economy globally. And by doing that, I remind myself that collapse is already occurring all over the place. It just hasn't hit me in my town quite yet, but I remind myself that, you know, coming soon to a town near me. And that humility, I allow my heart to hurt, but it no longer hits me like a dagger because I have this ecological understanding of history. And you're absolutely right. Uncertainty can lead to hope, but uncertainty, unfortunately, can also lead to a lot of anguish. A lot of people, because they focus on all the things that are uncertain, they think that it'll give them hope. But I suggest that if we ground ourselves in these 4 fundamental facts, which is that climate isn't our biggest problem, overshoot is, that overshoot and collapse are built into the DNA of civilizations, that denial is practically universal, and that calm gratitude is both possible and contagious. When we ground ourselves in those, we don't need to ground ourselves in uncertainty to have gratitude. I mean, astonished gratitude, and look for every opportunity to make a difference. It's like a person who has a terminal diagnosis who fully accepts it. I did 14 years ago. I had a cancer that could have killed me in 10 months. And so that once I accepted that, I was able to live fearlessly, and every day that I eat, it was like, wow, I get to eat another day. Today, I get to go shopping. I can go to the supermarket. I can still put gas in the car. So I don't take anything for granted. But the courage, I think, comes from accepting these realities and then finding ways to be a blessing. Somebody gave me a baseball cap, and I'll shut up here with this. It says Teotowaki, the end of the world as we know it. And I have a shirt with the earth. And sometimes people, I'll wear it around town, and people are like, what's that? And I say, oh, Teotowaki, it's an indigenous term. It means things are spiraling down. Probably going to get worse, but just look for an opportunity to be a blessing to others. You'll be fine. And that's, I think, the basic core message of post-doom, no gloom.
I really do like that term Teotowaki. I think that's an excellent acronym there.
Yeah, I didn't create it. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay.
CJ, are there other questions that have come in?
Have we lost Gail?
Looks like we might have lost Gail, yeah. So I'm going to jump in as moderator. My name is JD Stillwater. Let's see. I'm going to start with the last one from, wait, where did it go? 1 second. Paul Carr asks, Limits to Growth, published about 50 years ago, made similar predictions. It also predicted significant declines in our population. And he's asking how large a population might be left.
That's a great question. And hi, Paul. Again, I'm going to ground myself in what Mark said, uncertainty. We just don't know. We could see, and I encourage people to live as if this is your last decade. It may not be. But if we live as if this is our last decade, that there may be a multi-breadbasket failure in the next 3 to 5 years, meaning there's 5 main grain growing regions of the world. And if 2 of them fail in the same year, you're looking at 500 million people possibly dying in 14 months. If 3 or more fail in the same year, you're looking at 2 or 3 billion people dying in 14 months. And that's not outside the realm of possibility. Most people have no idea just how fragile the survival is for most of us in the industrial world in terms of complex supply chains, energy. Even a banking collapse could bring us back to something worse than the Great Depression. And we're looking at not decades down the road. This could happen in the next year or 2. Just this year, we could see the ice. So if the El Nino is severe and the ice significantly shrinks and more of that sunlight isn't being bounced off, so it's being absorbed, we could see a die-off of 500 million to 3 billion people in the next 5 years. We just don't know. But from history, we know that the carrying capacity, that is how many human beings can be supported by the Earth system without fossil fuels, is less than 1 billion. So it seems that there'll be definitely less than 1 billion no matter what, and it may drive us into extinction. We just don't know.
And I'm hearing echoes of the uncertainty that Mark was referring to. A couple detailed ones. Gerard asked if we could get access, if the audience could get access to the slides. And I just want to tell him that this is all being recorded and it will be posted on the IRAS website. So you can access those probably in the next couple of days.
Well, and also by my name, it says postdoom.com. On the Postdoom website, if you click on connect, that's where the conversations are happening. And the most pastoral, I have 5 videos that are the most pastoral, emotionally supportive videos. But you'll also see a link to my slides also on the resource page. And so all the slides that I use in my programs, I actually have in a Dropbox so that you can download them and make use of them if you want and change them if you want.
Nice. Here's a detailed question. Deborah Leclerc was looking at your slide about, it was a 270-year graph, and she's wondering, how did you define well-being? How, is there data behind that?
How did I define well-being? I'm trying to remember which slide that was going to. Basically, in terms of health and well-being, it's going to be different. The health of the well-being of the oceans, the health of the well-being of the soil, the health and well-being. I mean, there's no one measurement, but it can be fairly guessed at in terms of the numbers of species that it's able to support in a healthy way without them suffering or going extinct. And so the same thing with human health and well-being. I mean, there are certain things that are pretty universal to most human beings. In fact, one of my programs I do just on that. But the same thing, the health and well-being of animals, the health and well-being of plants. This is why Connie's so committed to assisting trees in migrating. As I said, the assisted migration of forests in North America page in Wikipedia is a great place to learn about it, because that's holy work that we can do even if our species goes extinct in the next 10 to 50 years.
Yeah. Well, speaking of holy work, Gerard asks, what are your reactions to Laudato Si?
Oh, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. Pope Francis, in that document especially, but in other things as well, and Patriarch Bartholomew, the Dalai Lama, there are some major religious leaders in the world who have what I call a green heart. I mean, the reason I wear this green clergy shirt is because I'm committed to the greening of religion. But there are profound leaders who have influence over, millions and millions of people that have a green heart. We're all still embedded in an ecocidal civilization. And that's the problem. That's why every religion, if anybody's religious, they should go deeper into their own religion. That's where they're going to find comfort. That's where they're going to find support. That's where they're going to find solace, because we need the wisdom of the religious traditions. But again, the program that I'd love to do if I'm ever invited back here has to do with what is the difference between lifeways or religions in truly sustainable cultures, where religion or lifeways, what they do is they play the role of ensuring that the future is not compromised by the present. It ensures accountability to the future. The problem is all the great religious traditions of the last 3,000 years emerged in cultures that were already ecocidal. They were already boom and bust cultures. So they couldn't actually keep the political and economic establishment and ensure accountability to the future. So religions in truly sustainable cultures is what Teddy Goldsmith, who spent a lifetime, he was the editor and founder of The Ecologist magazine for 40 years, and wrote one of the most important books, The Way, an ecological worldview. He called religion he defined religion actually as the control mechanism of stable, sustainable cultures, meaning it was that aspect of society that spoke with moral authority that the future will not be compromised by the present. Because if religion doesn't play that role, no other institution in society will do that. But in unsustainable cultures, religion downgrades to a coping mechanism. It's not the control mechanism. It doesn't ensure accountability to the future. It's a coping mechanism. It helps people have healthy relationships and have good lives and die peacefully in the midst of a culture that is itself a civilization that's itself ecocidal.
Chuck Fowler asks, when are you going to write a book with the title, Thank God for Reality, as it works to put us in our place via homeostasis?
The marketing people wouldn't like that, but I align with the basic impulse. Yes, exactly. I am thinking of writing just a little short thing. My first book, Earth Spirit, a handbook for nurturing an ecological Christianity. I wrote it in 1990.
Yeah.
And it was a little 117-page thing that was an attempt to take the core elements of the Christian faith and interpret them in light of this ecocentric new cosmology, Thomas Berry sort of worldview. And it did pretty well. I mean, not as good as my Thank God for Evolution book did, but I want to write something about that size again. But yeah, I don't know the title exactly quite yet, but yeah, I'm working on it.
Oh, I'm not sure where to go next, but this one gets into the deeper stuff.
Okay,
Paul
good.
asks, are you arguing that everyone is best served by approaching death by the model you've laid out, by which I think he means acceptance? Or might some people be more fulfilled and more useful to others by, quote, raging against the dying of the light, end quote? Is there not a role for both?
That's something that each individual is going to have to discern for themselves. I would never be one to try to convince somebody, if that's genuinely their authentic truth, to rage against, go for it. It's not the way I want to live my life, and it's not the way that I've seen allows people to die in a place of genuine, like, celebration of the gift of being alive and the gratitude to God, to life, to reality that I've been given this time to live in. That's why I love the 15 benefits of collapse acceptance video with the post-doom conversation that I had with Karen Perry so much, is that it really gets into what are the benefits that only come when we truly accept that we're part of a larger being, Homo colossus, that actually does have a terminal condition. And it may or may not mean that any one of us dies in the next 5 to 10 years or 20 years, but it's certainly a very realistic possibility. And in my experience personally with my cancer 14 years ago, and just in general with life and dealing with people who can accept that and trust the process. That's why I so emphasize an ecological understanding of history. I mean, if you only read one book the rest of your life, read William Catton's book, Overshoot. I've recorded the audio. It's all available freely up online. And when I'm moved by Catton's generosity of soul, you can hear me crying, sobbing, I leave the mic on. So I would never tell someone how they should approach death. But I personally want to approach my own mortality and our species' mortality with as much grace and generosity and compassion and love and kindness that I possibly can.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Gail Waring writes, overwhelmed. Where does a loving God who continues to create the universe fit into your thesis?
At the heart, at the center. The only thing is shifting from a human-centered to a God-centered understanding of God, that is a life-centered understanding of God. I no longer have the belief that humans are God's chosen species. I think God loves all creatures universally. I remember one time a few years ago, somebody said, remember, God loves his plagues too, but for me, at the very heart of the entire process is exactly that. The love of reality. In fact, there's a slide I almost had in this that I didn't have, which is, we think of a God's eye. In fact, here, I can still do screen share. This will take me half a minute here. A God's eye view of the world, we often think of as the view from above and outside it all. Oh, no, I don't have it. At any rate, so I've got to stop screen sharing. Like the view, like where you can see a galaxy from the outside. And yet a God's eye view is also the view from within every set of eyes, from within the dragonfly's eyes, the frog's eyes, the human eyes, all eyes. That has got to be included. The subjective experience of every creature has got to be included in the God's eye view of the world. And God's love encompasses the love that all creatures feel for each other and whatever this larger reality is. So I would say at the very heart.
And the last question is going to go to Nancy Abrams, who I think you know.
I love Nancy Abrams. Yes.
Well, I love her question. And it's, do you speak to children? And if so, what do you tell them?
Wow. Well, I love you, Nancy, for that question. The answer is yes. And I keep it real simple. And it depends upon their age. I have a almost 3-year-old granddaughter, and I don't talk to her about any of this stuff. And I probably won't for a number of years, assuming we're graced to have that long. I also have a 12-and-a-half-year-old granddaughter. And with her, I keep things basically kind of simple, which is that we know from evidence that most people don't accept reality. Most people deny anything that's uncomfortable or scary about the future. And so just accept that. And don't try to convince or convert people to whatever you think or know is the truth. That we're in a civilization in decline, not expansion. And that, you know, I haven't used the word Tiatawaki with my granddaughter, my 12-year-old yet, but I probably will, which again, like kind of that humorous thing, that we're in a declining phase. Things are probably going to get worse each season, each year. But if you just look for an opportunity to be a contribution, to be a blessing, to exercise compassion and generosity with anyone else, you'll feel better about yourself. And then even the lifestyle changes that, you know, kids, especially kids like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, they want to do something right, you know? And there's a way that we can all support that, because we all have to make lifestyle choices. Just because stopping eating meat or stopping flying or not having children or not driving, it's not going to save the world. Everybody's not going to do that, but it may help save your soul. It might allow you to pass the mirror test and feel good about yourself. And so I try to keep it really simple, depending upon the age of children. But what I'm working on right now is just a little 12-page document called The Big Picture. And I'll actually probably want to get Joel and Nancy's feedback on it before I go to the world with it, because they're just some of our dearest colleagues. And it's an attempt to say in a simple form, like 6th, 8th grade reading level, like what's the big picture that we really need to know to understand our world, so that confusion is replaced with clarity. It's like, oh, of course. And then compassion replaces blame, because when you're confused, everybody's looking to blame somebody else. So confusion replacing, or clarity replacing confusion, compassion replacing blame, and then love in action. Where does love motivate you to be in action? And so that I try to keep it simple with kids. But again, as they start getting teenagers, they're ready for a lot more of a complex conversation.
Wow. Thank you, Michael. What a powerful, and I'm sure that a lot of us are going to be thinking about this for a long time.
Well, and I hope, and I know that some of you are going to wake up tomorrow morning, if you're not already there, and just say, I just can't accept what Michael Dowd has to say, and be okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Thank you.